Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at evolution,
Oh, cool.
but not exactly how you might picture it.
Okay.
Get ready, because we're going on a journey through what's called the backwards gene's eye view of evolution.
The backward what?
The backwards gene's eye view.
Okay. That sounds a little wild.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild concept.
All right. I'm intrigued.
To help us through this, we'll be taking a chapter from Richard Dawkins,
Oh, awesome.
specifically from his book, The Greatest Show on Earth, The Evidence for Evolution.
Of course.
It's a great book.
It's a classic.
And the chapter we'll be focusing on is titled The Backwards Gene's Eye View,
Okay.
which I think is one of the most interesting parts of the book.
Yeah, for sure.
In it, Dawkins proposes this idea that genes can basically look back at their lineage and see the evolutionary pressures that shape them.
So like genes with a rear view mirror.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But instead of reflecting cars behind them.
They see generations of ancestors.
Yeah. So we're talking about genes actually having a kind of memory encoded in their structure.
That's a great way to put it.
And what's even more interesting is that genes don't necessarily view all their ancestors equally.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some ancestors are more important than others from the gene's point of view.
I see.
This makes me think about genomic imprinting.
Ah, yes.
That has to be connected to this somehow, right?
It absolutely is. It's a great example of how a gene's perspective shapes its behavior.
So what exactly is genomic imprinting again?
Well, essentially, it means that a gene can know whether it came from the mother or the father.
Whoa, wait a minute.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
Genes can tell who they came from.
Yep. And that totally changes how a gene views its own self-interest, particularly when it comes to things like kinship and altruism.
So are you saying genes can play favorites among their relatives?
Let's think about a gene that encourages altruism towards siblings, right?
Okay.
If that gene doesn't know its parental origin, it might value a full sibling more than a half-sibling. But if that gene knows it came from the mother, it would suddenly view a maternal half-sibling as equal to a full sibling.
Oh, wow. So even at the genetic level, family dynamics can get really complicated.
It's definitely complex.
It makes you wonder how this might play out in humans, in terms of how we perceive our own family relationships.
Absolutely. It's a really interesting area of research. And some scientists, like David Haig at Harvard, they actually suggest that genomic imprinting might even be linked to internal psychological conflicts.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Those inner struggles we have between things like instant gratification and long-term goals.
Yeah.
It's as if our genes are having their own little family drama going on inside of us.
That is a wild thought.
It's just pretty wild.
Now, I'm curious about how this gene's eye view applies to things like sex chromosomes.
Okay.
I mean, a gene on the Y chromosome is going to have a totally different history than a gene on an X chromosome.
Absolutely. A gene on a Y chromosome has only ever lived in male bodies. So it's been swimming in a sea of testosterone, witnessing a very specific kind of lineage.
Right, whereas a gene on an X chromosome...
It's seen both sides.
Exactly.
And then it gets even more interesting when you factor in something called male reproductive skew.
Okay, what is that?
This is when a very small number of males within a species end up monopolizing most of the mating opportunities.
Oh, wow. So from a gene's perspective, being on a Y chromosome in a species with a lot of male reproductive skew means you're likely looking back at a lineage of the most dominant, the most successful males.
Exactly. And that brings us to a pretty dramatic example, elephant seals.
Oh, yeah.
Dawkins talks about these in the book.
They're huge.
They're massive. These creatures have this crazy social structure where a few super dominant males called beachmasters,
Oh, right.
they control entire harems of females, sometimes dozens of them.
And the other males.
Yeah, the vast majority of males just get left out with basically no chance to reproduce.
Man, that's harsh. Especially for those bachelor seals that never get to pass on their genes.
Yeah, it might seem unfair.
Yeah.
But it actually perfectly illustrates how this gene's eye view helps us understand the forces that shape behaviors.
Okay, I see that.
In the case of elephant seals, those genes on the Y chromosome, their history is totally defined by intense competition and the traits that lead to dominance.
Right, so those genes have witnessed generations of beach masters battling it out for control.
Exactly.
It seems kind of wasteful, though, doesn't it?
What do you mean?
All those bachelor seals, they're consuming resources, but they're not contributing to continuing the species.
I see what you mean.
You'd think natural selection would favor a system that's more, efficient.
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Dawkins addresses this head-on with a thought experiment about a planned economy.
Yeah, planned economy.
Where the sex ratio is skewed, so you just have enough males to fertilize all the females.
So a much more efficient system?
Yeah, on the surface, it seems like less waste, less competition, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But there's a catch.
What's that?
Natural selection doesn't work at the level of the species.
Okay.
It works on individual genes.
Okay.
So if a gene pops up that favors having more sons, even in this perfect economy, it would spread super fast because those sons would have a much higher chance of reproducing.
Because of the skewed ratio.
Exactly.
So the 50-50 sex ratio we see in most species,
Yeah.
that's actually the most stable from a gene's perspective, even if it looks wasteful to us.
Precisely. There's something called Fisher's principle of parental expenditure.
Okay.
That explains it beautifully.
How so?
It suggests that parents will invest equally in both sons and daughters.
Even if that doesn't mean equal numbers survive to reproduce.
Right. So even with the competition and all those bachelor seals, the system finds a balance in the end.
It's fascinating how that works.
It is.
All this talk about males fighting for dominance makes me think about risk-taking behavior. Does that tie into this gene's eye view as well?
It absolutely does. Think back to those elephant seals.
Okay.
The stakes are incredibly high for the males.
Right. Win and they get a harem.
Exactly. And potentially tons of offspring.
And lose.
They probably get nothing and might even die trying.
Oh, wow.
So natural selection actually favors males who are more courageous, maybe even a little reckless, because the potential payoff is huge.
That makes sense.
Right. For females, though, it's a whole different story.
Yeah, they just have one pup per year.
Right. So their priority is survival, making sure they live to reproduce again.
So natural selection favors totally different strategies in males and females.
Exactly. It's one reason why in many species, males tend to die younger. Their bodies are basically geared toward maximizing their chances of reproducing while they're young, even if it means a shorter lifespan.
So those classic gender stereotypes.
You know, like the daring male, the cautious female.
Right.
There might be a biological basis for that.
It all goes back to evolution.
Yeah. Exactly. Of course, it's not always so black and white.
Right.
Think about those sneaky males that try to bypass the dominant males and mate with females on the sly.
Oh, yeah. Those sneaky guys always looking for a shortcut.
They have their own strategy.
This reminds me of something else Dawkins talks about.
Where's that?
Dispersers versus stay-at-homes.
Yeah.
Why would any creature leave a perfectly good habitat?
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Totally.
You'd think staying put in a successful environment would be the best bet.
It seems way safer.
Right, but Dawkins, drawing on the work of W.D. Hamilton and Robert May,
Right.
he explains that natural selection actually favors a balance between these two types.
I don't really get that.
How so?
Why would leaving a good habitat ever be a good strategy?
Well, think about it from the gene's perspective.
Okay.
Say there's a family living in this great spot, a real family farm, as Dawkins puts it.
Right.
They're doing great there for generations, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then, boom, something unexpected happens.
Oh.
A fire, a flood, some other catastrophe.
I see.
Suddenly staying put isn't such a good idea.
Not if your whole habitat is wiped out.
Exactly. When a gene looks back at its history, it sees these occasional catastrophes that can wipe out entire populations.
And the ones that survive.
They're the dispersers, the ones who ventured out.
Right. They might have had a harder time initially.
Yeah.
But they're the ones who made it through.
And ensured the continuation of their lineage.
That's amazing.
It's like a genetic insurance policy.
So spreading out increases the odds that at least some of your genes will survive.
That's the idea.
It's like locusts.
Oh, how so?
Those swarms, they're like the ultimate dispersers.
That's a fantastic analogy. Dawkins actually uses locusts. Really? Yeah, he points out how even seemingly stable populations can have this hidden wanderlust potential.
That's cool.
It makes you wonder what other seemingly stable species might have some kind of hidden migratory secret.
Yeah. Okay, this brings us to another creature Dawkins talks about. The naked mole rat.
Ah, yes, those fascinating little guys.
What are they like?
Well, they're these weird hairless rodents.
Yeah, I've seen pictures. They're kind of strange looking.
They are, and they live in underground colonies, a lot like ants or termites.
Really?
They even have a queen who does all the reproducing, and then there are workers.
So they're the ultimate stay-at-homes, right?
Right. Always underground, always in the colony.
But isn't there something strange about them?
There is. Unlike ants or termites, they don't have a dispersal phase.
Wait, what does that mean?
It means there's no point where winged reproductives fly off to start new colonies.
Oh, that's weird.
It is. It's a real puzzle because you'd think that would be essential for a species like this.
So how do they spread to new areas then?
It's a mystery. Dawkins speculates that maybe there's some hidden dispersal phase that we just haven't discovered yet.
Like what?
Maybe a hairy, above-ground form that's been misidentified as another species.
Interesting.
He even suggests that we might be able to trigger this phase with some clever hormonal manipulation.
Wow, that would be amazing if they found that.
It would. It shows how much we still don't know about the natural world.
All this talk about ancestry makes me wonder.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between tracing our ancestry through people versus through genes?
That's a great question.
Like, is there a different way to look at it?
It comes down to what Dawkins calls people trees and gene trees.
Okay.
People trees, like your typical family tree, branch out exponentially as you go back in time.
Right. 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on.
It gets really complicated really quickly.
Yeah, for sure. But gene trees are different.
Much simpler. Each gene has only one parent gene,
Okay.
one grandparent gene, and so on.
So it's like a single line going back through time.
Precisely.
Like a single thread in that tangled web of the people tree.
Exactly. And sometimes tracing the history of a single gene can be much more informative than looking at a huge, messy people tree.
Do you have an example of that?
Dawkins uses the example of royal hemophilia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wasn't that passed down through Queen Victoria's family?
Yes, exactly. The gene tree for royal hemophilia is pretty simple and direct. It traces back to a single mutation in one of Queen Victoria's ancestors.
Okay.
But if you tried to draw a people tree showing all the people affected by that gene, it would be a total nightmare.
So the gene's perspective gives us a cleaner view of how that trait was passed down.
Much cleaner. There's even a whole branch of genetics dedicated to this. Coalescent theory.
What's that?
It focuses on tracing genes back to their most recent common ancestor.
So using genetics to find your genetic Adam and Eve, basically.
Precisely. The ancestors that gave rise to all the variations we see today.
Wow, that's incredible. You mean we can learn about the lives of our distant ancestors just by studying our own DNA?
It really is amazing, and it's not just theoretical. By analyzing the genome of a single person,
You can learn about their ancestors.
not just their ancestors, but the demographic history of their entire population.
Wait, really? How is that even possible?
Well, in each of our cells,
Yeah.
we carry 2 copies of every gene, one from our mom and one from our dad.
Okay.
And by comparing those 2 copies,
Mm-hmm.
seeing how similar or different they are,
Yeah.
scientists can estimate when those 2 lineages last shared a common ancestor.
Oh, wow.
It's like looking for clues about past populations hidden in our own DNA.
That's so cool. Dawkins actually does this with his own genome, right?
He does, and it's fascinating.
What did he find?
Well, the analysis showed that his European ancestors went through a population bottleneck about 60,000 years ago.
A bottleneck. What does that mean?
It means that the effective population size got really small at some point,
Okay.
probably due to some tough environmental conditions or maybe a migration.
I see.
And this reduction in population size, it leaves a distinct mark in the genes.
So like a genetic echo of a tough time in our ancestors' past?
Exactly.
That's wild.
And what's really remarkable is that all this came from just Dawkins' genome.
Wow, it just shows how much information is packed into our DNA.
A ton of information.
It's mind-blowing that our individual genomes hold clues to the history of entire populations.
It really is.
It also makes me wonder, though,
Yeah.
do gene trees always perfectly match those traditional organism trees?
That's another great question, and it turns out that they don't always line up neatly.
Oh, really?
Sometimes genes can tell a different story about evolutionary relationships.
So are you saying the relationships between species can look different depending on which genes you look at?
Exactly. A good example is the gorilla genome.
Okay.
When scientists analyzed it, they found that about 15% of the human genome is actually closer to the gorilla genome than it is to the chimpanzee genome.
That's surprising.
It is.
You'd think our genes would always group us closest with chimps.
It's a good reminder that evolution is messy, it's complex.
Yeah.
Genes don't always follow those neat branching patterns.
So the gene's eye view gives us a more nuanced understanding of those relationships.
It does.
Does this apply to families too?
It does. Even 2 siblings. Even though they share the same parents, they might have inherited different proportions of their grandparents' genes.
Because of that random shuffling during reproduction.
Exactly.
So even within a family, The gene's eye view can reveal surprising variations.
Absolutely. And this brings us to one final fascinating concept for today. Selective sweeps.
Okay, what are selective sweeps?
Well, they're all about how strong natural selection acting on one gene can actually leave a mark in the surrounding genetic landscape.
A mark, what do you mean?
Imagine you have a gene that gives a big survival advantage.
Survival of the fittest, right?
Right. That gene will increase in frequency really quickly.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Because genes that are close together on a chromosome tend to be inherited together, that beneficial gene will kind of drag its neighbors along for the ride.
Even if those neighbors aren't helpful?
Even if they're neutral or even slightly disadvantageous. It's like a genetic hitchhiking effect.
That's a great way to put it.
And this sweep reduces the genetic variation in the region surrounding the beneficial gene.
Interesting.
It creates a kind of genetic desert.
A genetic desert.
By analyzing these patterns of variation,
Yeah.
scientists can actually detect these sweeps and figure out past episodes of strong selection.
So it's like finding footprints of evolution in our DNA.
That's a great way to think about it. That's the beauty of this gene's eye view.
It gives us a whole new way to see things.
It lets us uncover hidden patterns and gain a deeper understanding of how life has been shaped.
This is already a lot to take in.
It is.
And I'm sure there's more to come.
Oh, yeah. Lots more.
So everyone, stay tuned. Okay, so we're back and we're continuing our deep dive into the backwards gene's eye view of evolution.
It's a fascinating way to think about things.
It really is.
You know, we're so used to focusing on organisms as the main players in evolution.
Yeah.
But when you zoom in and start thinking about genes as the units of selection, it's like a whole new set of rules.
It really changes your perspective.
Totally.
Earlier, you talked about how genes experience companionship with other genes.
Right.
Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. So Dawkins really emphasizes this idea that genes don't exist in isolation.
They don't.
Nope. They're constantly interacting, cooperating within a shared gene pool.
Okay.
They get shuffled and recombined with each generation.
So it's like a giant genetic mixing bowl.
That's a great way to visualize it.
All these genes bumping into each other, forming new combinations.
Exactly. And that's what allows populations to adapt, to evolve.
I see.
It's this interplay that drives the whole process.
So it's not just about a single gene being fit.
Right. It's about teamwork.
It's about how well they all work together as a team.
Exactly. Dawkins uses this great analogy.
Oh, yeah.
He compares it to a rowing team.
Okay.
Each individual rower needs to be strong, skilled, but it's their coordinated effort that makes the boat go fast.
I love that.
It really captures the idea.
So you're saying there's like a team spirit at the genetic level?
In a way, yeah. And that brings us to another fascinating part of the gene's eye view.
Okay, what's that?
The evolution of altruism.
Altruism.
Yeah.
But that seems kind of contradictory, doesn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, we've been talking about genes being selfish.
Right.
But altruism is the opposite of that.
It does seem paradoxical.
Why would a gene promote behavior that helps others, even at its own expense?
Well, from a gene's perspective, altruism can be a really smart strategy.
Okay, how so?
Especially when it comes to relatives.
Relatives, why?
Because relatives share genes.
Right.
So helping a relative could indirectly benefit your own genes.
Even if it costs you something.
Exactly. It's like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
A genetic version of that.
Exactly. And there's actually a mathematical formula that explains this.
Oh, really?
It's called Hamilton's rule.
Hamilton's rule.
It was developed by W.D. Hamilton, a brilliant evolutionary biologist. And it basically says that altruistic behavior is favored when the benefit to the recipient, multiplied by the degree of relatedness, outweighs the cost to the altruist.
So like a genetic cost-benefit analysis.
Precise.
And that helps explain why we see so much altruism in nature,
Yeah,
right?
it does. Especially among close relatives.
Parents sacrificing for their kids.
Exactly.
Siblings helping each other.
Yep.
Even those social insects like ants and bees.
All working tirelessly for the colony.
It's like they're programmed to help those who share their genes.
It's not a conscious decision, of course.
Yeah, of course not.
It's just the result of natural selection favoring genes that promote these behaviors.
That's so fascinating.
It is.
But this brings up another point, right?
What's that?
What about that conflict between individual self-interest and the good of the group?
Yeah, that's where things get a bit more complicated.
Because we often hear about the good of the species.
Yeah.
But does that actually matter from the gene's perspective?
Well, Not really. You see, from a gene's point of view, the species is just a temporary group of individuals.
Okay.
The real goal is to get your genes into the next generation.
Yeah.
Even if it means going against the interests of the group sometimes.
So there's this constant back and forth between selfishness and cooperation.
Exactly. Dawkins uses this example of territoriality in birds.
Okay, birds.
You might think it would be good for the species as a whole to spread out.
Yeah, to use all the resources.
Right, but from an individual bird's perspective,
Yeah.
it makes more sense to defend your territory, keep rivals away.
Even if some resources go to waste.
Exactly. It's about maximizing your own chances of having offspring.
So being a little greedy can actually be a good strategy.
It can be. And this conflict plays out in so many ways in nature.
Like what?
Competition for mates, dominance hierarchies, even things like infanticide.
Wow, that's intense.
It is, but it's also fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, understanding the gene's eye view helps us see why these things happen.
It's like a whole new way of looking at the world.
It really is.
You know, earlier you said that genes experience things,
Yeah.
but they're just molecules.
Right.
How can they have experiences?
That's a great question, and it goes to the heart of why this gene's eye view is so powerful.
Okay.
When we say a gene experiences something,
Yeah.
we're not saying it's consciously aware.
Yeah.
It's a shorthand way of describing its evolutionary history.
So.
You know, the information in a gene, it reflects all the challenges, the opportunities it faced over generations.
So it's like a record of its past.
Exactly. It's like a genetic memory.
A genetic memory. That's cool.
And by analyzing genes, we can unlock those memories.
Wow.
We can learn about the evolutionary pressures that shaped them.
It's like reading a history book written in DNA.
That's a fantastic analogy. And what's amazing is that every gene tells a different story.
They do.
Some genes are super old,
How old?
passed down from the earliest life forms on Earth.
Wow.
Others are relatively new, maybe arising through mutations.
Okay.
It's really incredible.
It makes you wonder, what stories are hidden in our own genes?
I'm so glad you asked that because it leads us to one of the most exciting things happening in genetics.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Personal genomics.
Personal genomics. What is that?
With DNA sequencing becoming so affordable,
Yeah.
people can actually have their entire genome analyzed.
So we can learn about our own evolutionary history.
Exactly.
Our ancestry, maybe our predisposition to certain diseases.
All of that. It's really empowering.
It's like having a personalized owner's manual for your body.
That's a great way to put it.
But there must be some ethical concerns too, right?
There are, definitely.
Like what?
Well, we need to make sure this information is used responsibly.
Right. We don't want people being discriminated against because of their genes.
Absolutely. We need to protect people's privacy
Yeah.
and make sure this technology is accessible to everyone.
So there's a lot of responsibility that comes with all this knowledge.
There is, but the potential benefits are huge.
I can see that.
And it's not just about understanding ourselves as individuals.
Right.
By comparing genomes from lots of different people,
Right.
we can learn about human history, migration patterns, the origins of genetic diversity.
It's like piecing together a giant puzzle, one gene at a time.
That's a great way to think about it. And then there's this amazing field of ancient DNA research.
Ancient DNA, what's that?
Scientists are actually extracting DNA from fossils.
Right.
And other ancient remains.
That's incredible.
So we can actually compare our genes to those of Neanderthals,
Wow.
Denisovans, and other extinct human relatives.
That's mind-blowing. What have they found so far?
Well, one of the big discoveries is that modern humans actually interbred with both Neanderthals and Denisovans.
No way.
And most people alive today carry some Neanderthal DNA in their genome.
Really? So we're all a bit of a genetic mosaic.
Precisely. Carrying the legacy of our ancient ancestors within us.
That's amazing.
And the more we learn, the more we see how interconnected all life on Earth really is.
This is a lot to process.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot to think about.
But it's fascinating. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
We have, but this gives you a good sense of the power of the gene's eye view.
It really does.
And the more we learn about our genes,
Yeah.
the more we learn about ourselves and our place in the universe.
Okay, well, everyone stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore what all of this means for the future. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the gene's eye view of evolution.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's incredible to think about how much our understanding of genetics has changed everything,
It really has.
especially in medicine.
Absolutely. What was once science fiction is now becoming a reality.
You're talking about personalized medicine.
Exactly.
It seems like that term's been around forever.
It has been a buzzword for a while.
But is it actually happening? Are we really getting to that point?
Oh, it's definitely happening. We're already seeing incredible progress.
Like what?
Well, with our knowledge of genes and how they interact with the environment,
Yeah.
we're developing much more targeted and effective treatments.
So instead of that one-size-fits-all approach,
Right, we're moving away from that.
we're getting treatments tailored to each person's unique genetic makeup.
Exactly.
So it's like instead of treating just the symptoms,
Yeah,
we can actually get to the root of the problem, the genetic causes of diseases.
that's the goal.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure, take cancer treatment, for example.
Okay.
Scientists can now pinpoint specific genetic mutations that are driving the growth of a tumor.
Wow.
And that allows doctors to choose drugs that target those mutations directly.
So much more precise.
Exactly. More effective treatments, fewer side effects.
It's like we've gone from using a shotgun to having a precision-guided missile.
I like that analogy. And it's not just cancer. We're using genetics to diagnose rare diseases much more accurately. We can predict an individual's risk of developing certain conditions later in life.
That's incredible.
And we can even use genetic information to guide lifestyle choices.
So it's like having a personalized roadmap for your health journey.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about reacting to illnesses.
Okay.
It's about preventing them in the first place.
So genetics is also playing a big role in preventive medicine.
Absolutely. If we can identify genetic predispositions early on,
Yeah.
we can potentially take steps to reduce those risks and promote healthy aging.
So empowering people to take control of their health.
Exactly, being proactive instead of reactive.
It all sounds very promising.
It is.
But I imagine there are ethical considerations we need to think about.
Oh, absolutely. We have to be very careful with how we use this knowledge.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, for one thing, we need to make sure that access to genetic testing and personalized medicine is fair.
Right. Accessible to everyone.
Exactly, not just for the wealthy.
And what about things like genetic discrimination?
That's another huge concern. We have to protect people's privacy and make sure that their genetic information isn't used against them.
Like denying employment or insurance?
Exactly. These are tough issues, but we can't ignore them.
Definitely not.
It's a lot of responsibility.
But sounds like the potential benefits are worth it.
Oh, they absolutely are.
And, it's not just medicine that's being transformed.
Right. Genetics is having a huge impact on other fields, too.
Like what?
Well, agriculture, for one.
Agriculture? How so?
Scientists are using genetic engineering to develop better crops.
Better crops in what way?
Crops that are more resistant to pests and diseases, more nutritious, and even better adapted to climate change.
So we can use genetics to help address food security issues.
Exactly.
And make agriculture more sustainable.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then there's forensics.
Oh, yeah. DNA evidence is everywhere these days.
It's revolutionized criminal investigations.
It's incredible to think that something as small as DNA
I know, right?
can have such a big impact.
It really shows the power of science.
And our ability to use that knowledge to help people.
Absolutely.
What about conservation? You mentioned that too.
Yes. Genetics is playing a crucial role in protecting endangered species.
That's so important.
It is. We can use genetics to study those species, track their populations,
Right.
and develop strategies to prevent them from going extinct.
So it's all connected.
It is. Everything is connected.
The more we learn about our genes, the more we learn about all life on Earth.
That's what makes this field so fascinating.
Well, I think my brain is officially full.
I know what you mean. It's a lot to take in.
But it's been an incredible journey.
It has. And we've only just scratched the surface.
That's the thing about science. There's always more to discover.
Always. And the more we learn, the more questions we have.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the gene's eye view of evolution.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thank you for being here. Until next time,